pretty big ask to follow Christopher and Mike this morning with their very significant messages and exciting presentations. I was a bit upset because I think Christopher's photos kind of pipped mine a bit. I'm thinking, I'll have the best photos, but I'm not sure anymore. But I'm quite relieved to say I came over on Air New Zealand, so that was a relief. And the safety video, I'm sure those of you who travel with Air New Zealand, in terms of stakeholder engagement, us as customers sitting there, it's probably the most engaging safety video that you'll come across, and that's just one small example, I think, of how tuned in Air New Zealand are. So this photo here is actually of a place called Coral Bay, which is in Western Australia, about 2/3 of the way up. It's one of the hardest places to get to, very remote. And last week when I was finalising my presentation for today, I was just back from a holiday there, and I was feeling quite sorry for myself about not being on holiday anymore, and decided I would integrate a few photographs into my presentation just to try and extend that holiday. So if you'll indulge me today, that would be appreciated. And I hear that some of you have just had school holidays, so some of you may be in the same frame of mind as me. So just moving to the next now then. How does this work, guys? There we go. Excellent. So let's start off with what we're going to cover. And I appreciate I'm standing between you and morning coffee, so I'll do my best to keep it dynamic and succinct. I'll start off by talking a little bit about social license to operate and how we can integrate stakeholder engagement into that. And then on to a really practical approach. And I apologise in advance for this practical approach. My general approach to things is, okay, that sounds really difficult. I need to know what it is, and then how can I actually do something step by step and practically to address this? How can I make this work for my organisation? And so what I'm going to take you through today is a very, very straightforward step-by-step approach that any organisation can do. Some of you will already be looking at materiality determination, and so hopefully there'll be a few new ideas, maybe just some refreshing. And some of you, I'm hoping, this will be new and it will demystify something that is actually step by step. So we'll go through what it is, a bit about why you would do it, something about the output, some examples, and really what the process is. I was quite relieved when Penny talked about social license to operate emerging in the mining sector first. When I thought about today, I thought, well, which of the companies I work with should I go to and ask, give me an example, what's your definition, give me a concrete example of social license to operate. So I went to MMG, which is a mid-tier mining company that I work with in Melbourne. And they're Australian based, they're sort of zinc, lead, copper, rapidly growing. They've just made an acquisition in Peru, they operate in Laos, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Australia, and Canada. And their definition was the social license to operate depends on how we engage with our stakeholders and the investments we make which benefit our communities and our company. But I also appreciated the definition that Penny gave around the ability of an organisation to carry on its business in a socially and environmentally accountable and responsible way, and that it's difficult to get your social license to operate and very easy to lose it. So I asked MMG to elaborate and to take us through. Oh, thank you. Thanks. To take us through some of the elements of social license to operate. And the interesting part was it's an approach that you could apply to most things that you do in business. So understanding the impacts. What are the impacts that society faces from what you do as an organisation? So for mining, anything from health and safety impacts to traffic, dust, noise, all these things, economic impacts. So what are the impacts society faces? And then broadly, the country that you're operating in, what are the broader societal impacts? So if you're operating, for example, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, as MMG are, that country is extremely high on the failed states index, some very significant human rights issues that will be extremely depressing for us all to talk about this morning. And hardly bear talking about, in fact. And last year, certainly, I think Somalia was the only country in the world that was higher than the DRC on the failed states index. So if you imagine a mining company going into a new operation in a country like that and thinking about the people they're employing and the issues that they're bringing to the workplace and dealing with security forces and all these kind of issues. So it's understanding the context of the impacts that they bring, but also the issues that are already there in society. And then thinking about the investment that they can make. So how can they benefit the community? And I think that Christopher talked about it brilliantly for Air New Zealand. The direct impact, the jobs, the local suppliers of goods and services, the money spent. And I thought that the video that Christopher showed was fantastic, how it summed up the huge contribution to the economy that Air New Zealand makes. And if you imagine then you take that and you follow it through to the knock-on benefits for the future. And the community investment piece is probably where I think the mining companies have really benefited from having to do this first. So, that we can step back and say they had to do it, so it emerged there because it had to. They had to work out a way to gain and maintain that social license to operate. And that's where they're thinking long term. So the mining will finish. What happens when they're gone? What's the post-mining plan? And that's where they're thinking about investing in skills for the longer term, for local people, new business development. What will they do when they're no longer working or servicing the mine? So that gives you, I guess, an idea, an example of one sector and how they think of social license to operate, and how stakeholder engagement is right there in the middle. And without that engagement across the piece with all the different interested parties, how can you know what those impacts and issues are and what the benefits could be? Got another photo here. This was my holiday office. So the tide was actually coming in. I was thinking, damn, because I had such a great view sitting in that spot, and there's the corner of my laptop. I was just catching up on a few emails, hooked up through my iPhone. So even though it's remote, I had coverage on my iPhone, and just look at the colour of that water. So it was quite difficult to work and do emails and not just go snorkeling. But about an hour after I took this photo, a couple of dolphins swam into the bay, and that was quite exciting. I sort of threw off my dress. I had my swimmers on, should tell you that. Actually threw the laptop into the grass and started running down the beach. Got a few funny looks, but anyway, mainly because my running's pretty appalling. So materiality determination, what is it? It's a step-by-step process. It's one part of your broader stakeholder engagement program. It's a reality check. It's stepping back and saying, okay, we're working on all these things. Are they the right things? Are we sure we know who our stakeholders are? Are we sure we know what's most important to them? And so externally, that's quite varied and difficult to know unless you actually ask them. Internally, again, have we thought about all parts of the business and what the potential business impacts are? So why would you do it? Okay, I think actually one reason that's not on this list is over the years, sustainability has just become bigger and bigger, right? And the pile of codes and guidelines and frameworks and you name it. So we've got the GRI, I'm just going to roll off the acronym, CDP, IRC, accountability, what else? FTSE for Good, DJSI, it just carries on. And all with the best will in the world to understand what constitutes sustainability and what we should be doing. But we end up with a huge long list, right, of things that we need to do. And we end up possibly with a tick box approach and desperate to do everything and do the right thing. And so this process is about stepping back and saying, what are the priorities? We can't do everything. We can't satisfy everyone. We can't achieve everything. Let's get back to what matters. It provides assurance to the board and the exec that you are focusing your efforts and your strategy on the right things, that you know what they are, that you've understood the importance to your stakeholders. And it also knocks on then to communication and that you can really focus in your reporting. And of course, the ongoing feedback and contribution you have from stakeholder engagement feeds into this process. So drivers. So again, why do it? So independence is important. Sometimes people won't talk freely. Sometimes I won't tell you what you really think, especially your internal stakeholders. And I've had meetings where I've had a representative from the company with me, and then where I've done it on my own and got a completely different story. So sometimes it's good to try to use someone independent to help you achieve it. And the matrix, the materiality matrix, and it's a shame that Mike and Christopher aren't here anymore, because it's a really well-received quantifiable snapshot. So if you think, we call what we do non-financial sometimes, and the financial world's been going for a long time, and the board and the exec are very used to seeing numbers, matrices, prioritisation. And I think what we've been missing in the non-financial world is something similar, a one-page snapshot that shows how all the issues present, and so you can prioritise. And I've seen the light going on for board members where they look at this one-page matrix and they go, oh God, okay, it's about employee engagement, it's about customer satisfaction, it's about community investment, they're the top three. And you're, yep, they're the top three. And so it gives them a framework to sort of focus on, rather than seeing a long list of 20 or 30 things and going, oh, that's too hard, there's too many. The how. So, and to some in the room, this will probably seem, obvious, and seem, why do we think it's complicated, and when it isn't. So, initially, you've got to start off with something, a starting point, a document review, or some kind of you've got to get to what you think might be the material issues, a list perhaps the material issues, and we can use a document review and integrate feedback from ongoing stakeholder engagement into that. If you've already been doing stakeholder mapping, and in the panel session this afternoon I've got Bridget with me from Shell, and we'll be talking a bit about the stakeholder mapping process that Shell employs. If you're already doing that, this process is a bit smoother and a bit quicker. And then we move into, I'll talk to you about the ranking process that you can take stakeholders through, interviews, and getting into presenting matrices. Okay. And it's stopped working. There we go. What does success look like? Okay, this is a beautiful photo of a Coral Bay sunset here. It's got my daughter on there, so she's on the right, and her friend Lily's on the left. And everyone was very excited about the colours in the sky this night. But this is all about keeping your eye on the end goal. So you're in something that's quite complicated, but you're following a step-by-step process, and let's keep remembering why we're doing it. And be ready for differences, be ready for impacts on your strategy and your priorities and your reporting. So when you do this, it might turn out that the issues you thought were important aren't the ones that are top of the list. So you need to be ready for changes. The document review, look, this is fairly straightforward. This is where you say, okay, you might already have a list of material issues that you've been working on and reporting on and gathering data on, but it might be extremely long. There might be maybe 30 or 40 on it. And this is about making sure the right things are on that list. And you look at things like your risk registers, so your group-based, business-based, site-based. Look at board papers. So this is where you're saying, okay, what incidents have we had this year? Health and safety, complaints and grievances from the community. Look at the business plan. What are you trying to achieve? Media coverage, what are the concerns in recent times of stakeholders out there? What's news? And external reports, and say, for example, for the mining sector, they're quite lucky. They've got a couple of sector bodies that do horizon scanning and say these are the latest new issues emerging. Look at what your peers are doing. So what are they reporting on? They might even talk about the process they follow. And I've got with me for this afternoon a few examples of Australia Post, CPA Australia, Toyota, AGL, a few companies that are doing this, and they publish how they do it. And you might be doing surveys around community trust, brand equity, maybe some employee engagement that you can use. It's one of my favourite photos I took this year. So this is actually just after the moon's risen. So this is a moonrise in Coral Bay, and it's still, you can see how light it still is. So the sun's only just gone down and the moon's up, and it's at a particular point they're both in the sky. It's quite beautiful. Whoops. So then we move on to ranking. And so this is where you've got your list. You've looked at all these various sources to make sure you're fairly comfortable that you've got the key issues on the list, and you go out to a balanced number of internal and external stakeholders and you ask them to rank the issues. And that's quite hard, and you explain to them that you want relative rankings. So you don't want them to say, look, they're all important, every issue is a 5 out of 5. You say it's really important we see a range, preferably from 1 to 5 if you can. We want to see the relative importance. And if they don't do that, you go back to them and say, can you have another look? Sure, you really need to see what's important to you. And You want the same number of internal as external. You want the internal to cover all key parts of your business. And 1 would be not important, 5 would be extremely important, but you can use different scales. You also want them to highlight their top 3. So you're making it difficult for them. You're saying you've got to tell us your top 3 and explain why they're important to you. And this is the best bit, actually. That really gets you down to the nitty-gritty. Then you speak to them, of course, so you have one-on-one interviews with them and you validate their rankings. This is where you say, just double checking, why you rank this one high and did you really think about this? And you explore that and you also talk about the top 3 issues and make sure you've really understood what those issues mean to the stakeholder. So you're sort of taking it beyond just the quantified. It's actually got a bit of context. And it's also an opportunity if you want to get some feedback on an initiative or on reporting and so on. Examples of best practice, we can talk a bit more about that this afternoon. This is a photo from dinner at the pub in Coral Bay, which is another one of my favourites. And just quickly now, because I'm conscious that, everybody's probably desperate for a coffee. I know I certainly am. I thought I'd give you some examples from a power company that I've worked with earlier this year, AGL. They're a big energy generator and retailer in Australia, very big, 175 years old. I think they might even be the oldest company in Australia. I'm not 100% sure on that. This is hot off the press, what I'm going to show you now. And I was quite surprised. They said to me I could tell you it was their results, but I couldn't put their name on the slides because they haven't even published this yet. So it's to stay within this room if we can, and I guess it goes on online. So they'll be publishing it in their reporting soon. It's the first time that they have done materiality determination this way, but they had a list of 40 issues. And they're a long-standing company. They've got some fairly intense generation. They've got a lot of fossil fuel generation and all the issues that go with that. But they were concerned that for them, climate change was the be-all and end-all, but actually was it for their stakeholders? And turns out it isn't. So, it looks a bit scary. Not really. This is the overall ranking of the issues that comes out. So you get all the issues and where they come out in terms of importance. And you can also use colour coding on something like this to see where issue areas are coming out. So you might want to say, okay, these are all the health and safety issues, these are all the environmental issues, and you can see broadly which area is starting to emerge most strongly. And if you look at this, you can sort of see you've got 8 issues there that you could take as the top 8, and then another 8, and then 7, then 7, then 10. It sort of goes in groups and there's steps down. And so that's one way you can look at how you focus your efforts. You also get a matrix. It's difficult to show it to you like this, but usually it's on a piece of A4 and it's colour, and you zoom in on the top right-hand quadrant. So if you can imagine, the top corner is where you've got your most important issues. So you can zoom in on that and really get a bit more granularity around the really important issues and where they're coming out. And it's also supported, it's all in Excel, so you can actually sort of cut and play with the data in different ways in terms of looking at certain stakeholder groups and so on. And the front runners for AGL in that overall priority rating, you can see things like ethical conduct, customer satisfaction and experience, energy policy uncertainty, which is huge in Australia with the carbon tax in, then it's out. These guys don't know what to do. The renewable energy targets all over the place. We've got some serious issues around energy policy uncertainty in Australia with changing government. The top 3 issues is interesting, and it paints a completely different picture. And what we found there was when we asked stakeholders about the top 3 issues, 13 of their issues just dropped right off. Now, that doesn't mean that they ignore those issues from now on. It just means perhaps that communication on those is a bit more tailored. It might be online. In terms of initiatives, they might be very specific to individual stakeholders. So they don't disappear, but they're not perhaps up there with the priorities. But customer satisfaction and experience came out as the absolute front runner. And then we saw workplace health and safety, legislative compliance and profitability coming out very strongly. How am I doing for time? We're over. I started over, did I? Yeah, I started on the back foot. This is the one probably, as well as the matrix, that you find the board and the exec of companies particularly appreciate. This is where they're seeing alignment or not between internal and external stakeholders. And this may be an issue or it may not, but certainly usually it results in surprise in terms of board and executive response, and often it warrants a bit more investigation if the issue is concerning. And so for AGL, they had quite a lot of alignment actually around things like energy policy uncertainty and legislative compliance, but there were some areas where they weren't aligned, like supply and demand disruption and workplace health and safety. So for them, those are areas they're going to look into in a bit more detail. So just to finish off then, next steps for you. So this is one of my favourite photos, the champagne sunset, a nice way to finish a presentation and a nice way to finish a day. I like the way the sunset's kind of on an angle through the glass. There's more champagne in that glass than there normally is when I'm having a sunset at the end of the day. So moving on to next steps. For you in the room today, I mean, we're hearing some amazing presentations, and it's all about stepping back and working out what social licence to operate means to your organisation individually. It's about revisiting your stakeholder mapping. Have you really got that right? Do you really know who your stakeholders are? And it's about thinking about stepping back and saying, okay, there's lots of good reasons why we do what we do, our initiatives, our strategy, our priorities, but are they focused on the right things? Are they focused on the material issues? And that's pretty much it for me. I'd like to just finish on a quote. I always think a sign of a good speech is where you stop talking before the audience stops listening.